Welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show, everybody. We've returned to the fold to discuss, I think it's going to be largely confined to one movie this week.
Yep.
I did watch Brief Encounter, but I don't think anyone else had the time to do so.
But hey, it's one heck of a movie.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to talk about.
We're gonna have a lot of stuff to do. We're gonna dig into Lawrence of Arabia here shortly.
Yeah. Well, one of the movies we don't get to talk about these very often on the podcast because we most often
we really don't. We tend to stick to stuff that's somewhat off the beaten path a little bit. And
yeah. I think the last one I can think of was like, maybe 2001. Or no, there was something else we had.
Well, we did 2001. We covered Empire Strikes Back in our Star Wars episode.
Yeah,
which
that's
is,
probably the last real Titan.
Well, part of the last episode where we talked about one movie was Watchmen.
Oh, yeah. All the way back in episode 2 when we discussed the book and movie Watchmen.
Yeah, you're right.
It's going to be a very different conversation this time around.
Very different conversation. Yeah. I can't really talk about colonialism in the context of Watchmen.
Yeah.
Of course you can.
Well, not as explicitly with Lawrence of Arabia.
You're right.
All right. So,
but beyond a sort of nuanced but raging hot takes about one of the great titans of American cinema, what have we been watching?
What have we been watching? Yes, let's. We'll diversify the slate a little bit. Who wants to go first? Garrett.
Fuck, I'm not ready.
Okay, I am. I'll go first then.
Okay.
All right. Finally, I got around to watching James Cameron's Aliens, the sequel to 1979's Alien.
I have not seen Aliens.
It is fine.
What is our opinion on James Cameron?
I was about to say, in general, I'm fairly lukewarm on James Cameron, with the caveat that the two Terminator movies that he directed are both fantastic.
I haven't seen either of those, so that's something.
I'd be interested in rewatching them because it's been a few years, but those movies are great. Everything else, I'm kind of, lukewarm on. This movie is no exception. It is long. Like, too long. The first hour is, like, it just takes forever. Like, it's so much setup that really is, like, not important to what they're doing. And a lot of it is...
I realize that, like, Alien is a pretty simple monster movie.
It is. And that movie also takes a long time. Like, the first act of that movie is pretty slow. But that fits with the movie that movie was, which is, like, this kind of slow burn... steady, methodically paced haunted house sort of thing.
Yeah.
This movie is an action movie. And when you spend the first hour of your action movie with no action, just having a lot of, like, hoorah, space marine, like, macho posturing, like, that's your business for the first hour, you can lose a lot of that without really losing too much. And yeah, once they get to the planet, it gets better. It's still, like, a long time before, like, the action actually kicks in. Now, once it does, it's, like, it's pretty good. The last 45 minutes of the movie are pretty fun. But, I don't know. It does not come anywhere near, for me, to kind of recapturing the great stuff about the original. And, I get that it's a very...
I argue, nor really did it try.
It didn't try, but, like, it's just... It's not on that level. Like, James Cameron is not as interested in doing kind of risky things with the storytelling and, messing with the trappings. All the, the sci-fi design and all that stuff is still cool, but honestly, this movie on the whole, I was just kind of... I don't know. It was fun.
That's kind of disappointing because, like, I can imagine... Because Alien is kind of the perfect genre movie.
Yeah.
It's kind of the perfect, like, haunted house monster movie. You would think that, like, James Cameron, who is a genre director, you would think, like, him taking the keys that would be kind of a perfect fit via a la a different genre, of course. But, I'm still willing to take a look at it. I'm interested in James Cameron, even if I don't quite admire him all that much.
Yeah, he's an interesting director, for sure. The choices he makes are all very, at times, strange, and Often
I don't know why he decided to devote his life to Avatar movies, but hey, that's...
Who's to say?
or to exploring the Titanic for years, but, he's got the money.
He's got the money to do it. I'm not gonna... He's worked hard. I'm not gonna impugn him.
Capitalism has treated him well.
Yeah. Anyway, let's see. I ventured out to see 2 new blockbusters that have recently hit the multiplex.
I can imagine what they both are.
First up, Solo, A Star Wars Story.
I'm honestly surprised you saw this.
I was curious about what kind of a misfire that this movie was going to be, because I felt very sure that it was going to be a misfire.
It's one of the few, oh, Disney, you fucked up moments.
Yeah.
Because usually they're able, to put enough polish on, even something as, troubled as fucking, say, Ant-Man.
Mm-hmm.
To, turn out something that people are reasonably excited about.
Or maybe Tomorrowland.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story.
Well, this movie, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it's better than Rogue One. People will probably not agree with me on that, but I do think that Rogue One is more, openly and actively terrible.
Interesting.
But this movie is just, it's barely even worth talking about. It's nothing. I've never seen a movie that felt just more purely obligatory. It felt like no one involved cared at all. It looks terrible. It all looks like fucking sludge. There's one kind of cool action scene with a space train, but even that is not that great. I do like Alden Ehrenreich, Hobie Doyle. I don't think he was the right fit for this role, but he does have charisma.
Unless you fucking took Harrison Ford's DNA, I don't think you'd find a perfect fit. But
I don't need.
You do what you can.
Whatever. I don't know. There's one little thing that I did kind of appreciate. At the beginning, they had a little kind of touristy style join the Empire little ad, which I thought was pretty funny.
Okay, that's funny.
That was pretty much it. It is preposterous. Some of the choices they make in this movie are just bizarre. I was bored out of my mind. I've never walked out of a movie, but I frequently thought that I could have just cut my losses and left. Just because I would have had a more worthwhile time watching something else. And I found out after the fact that all my friends who I was seeing it with felt the same way, but none of us said anything, so we just stayed for the whole thing. Although I am kind of perversely glad that we did, because there's a cameo toward the end of this movie that I cannot fucking believe. Do you want me to tell you?
I'm never going to see this movie, so yes.
Darth Maul is in this movie. Darth Maul is in Solo, A Star Wars Story. I don't know why.
I don't know how to explain that.
I don't know. After 3 movies, of, explaining backstory and full of stuff that nobody liked, I don't know why we needed another movie explaining backstory and including, something that I guess Darth Maul is the one part of the Phantom Menace that pretty much everyone agrees is not terrible, even though he is.
Well, I think Movie Bob provide a perfectly good reason as to why a Solo movie should never exist, which is as Han Solo is nothing but one of those plucky rogues types that get folded into resistance movements because that just kind of happens in history. There is no backstory.
Well, I think that if you recall, Han Solo's arc in the original Star Wars is going from being a guy who only cares about himself to, caring about other people and somewhat caring about a cause.
Yeah.
If they had done an arc where in this movie where we could have seen how he became kind of a nihilistic, selfish, just, all for himself person, I could have maybe gotten on board with that if there had been a journey there, but there's not, so it doesn't matter, and it's not even worth talking about.
Disney isn't really good at leaving us at a negative point in a character's history.
Anyway, we're done with that. I don't even want to talk about it anymore.
Good, I don't care about it.
I also saw Deadpool 2. One really good, like really funny set piece in this movie where they create and immediately like completely destroy the X-Force. They like assemble a team of mutants and then dispatch them like 5 minutes later. Which is very well staged and very well executed. The rest of the movie is like Like, I was not laughing hardly at all. I'm very just tired of the whole, like, Deadpool meta shtick. Like, it only took one movie for that to get old.
Yeah, well, especially, like, the truly, like, cosmic shit that made, like, those, like, original comics really weird and what Jared Franich wrote about when the first movie came out. Mm-hmm. They, like, no studio would ever, like, sign off on that. Never mind, like, whatever, like, fucking superhero machines people are trying to build.
Yeah, I don't know. It's nothing. I could go on a long and rambling tangent about, like, the problematic stuff in this movie, of which there is plenty.
Yeah.
But, like, it's just fine, and I don't care.
I might be tasked of going along with buddies to go and see it tomorrow, so maybe I can use those breaths to talk about those things.
You will be much better suited to it than I.
Well, thank you.
Lastly, I think I might save Malcolm X because I want to have more time to really get into it.
Okay.
But I watched 2 Robert Bresson movies. The first one was called A Man Escaped.
Good title.
Escape.
Yes. It's about a man who, a French resistance fighter who is imprisoned by the Nazis, and, the whole movie is basically his, effort to mount an escape, which he does. It's the title of the movie, A Man Escaped. It's good. It's very well executed. I am kind of a sucker for, like, prison movies and prison escape sequences in movies when they're done well.
Logan Lucky was pretty much one extended one.
Yeah. Yes, I do love that sort of thing. I love all the trappings of it, and this movie does it pretty well. There is one point where, like, it starts to kind of ratchet things up, and then it kind of ratchets back down for a 10-minute period, but then the actual escape sequence is also very well done. So, very good movie. I would highly recommend that. I think you would enjoy it a lot. And then I watched his last movie, which was 1983's L'Argent, which is French for money. Mm-hmm. Good also. Okay. It's a very compelling setup. It follows basically this kid buys something with a counterfeit bill, and then it kind of follows all the escalation and some surprisingly tragic results that come about as a result of that. This movie takes a very dark turn at a certain point, which I was kind of not prepared for, but it's very well done and very well shot. Bresson has an interesting style where he kind of is always kind of following things and objects and kind of not necessarily like showing you like a person's whole body. He omits the face a lot at times. He has a real good eye for details, and kind of like Lynn Ramsey, he's very good at just kind of using visuals to kind of just piece together a narrative. So I recommend both these movies. They were both.
This sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, I think you would get a lot out of them. So, barring Malcolm X, which I think I will talk about later, that is what I have been watching.
Oh, goody. Reed, do you want to start, or do you want me to talk about Hercules?
So, what I've been watching was the last Chris Columbus Harry Potter film, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
Mm-hmm. The secret is that there's a giant fucking snake.
Yeah. Kind of pervy, too. But anyways, but then it gets blinded, so it's alright. by a Deus Ex Machina Phoenix. So, that's alright. So, the screenplay for this was written by Steve Kloves.
Yeah, he wrote almost all of them, I believe. He wrote all of them except for the 5th one.
This one's really bad.
It's
pretty bad.
It's not great.
No.
Yeah, it's of like all the ones. Warner got on a big tangent about this last year, but of like all the fucking Harry Potter movies, I think this is the most infamous.
This is the one that everyone seems to dislike.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously the writing and the actors. Oh boy. And this is definitely a sense of a I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you meddling kids type of ending.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. A lot of these are. But I think it must be noted that like the Chris Columbus ones are far more explicitly kids movies than any of the other ones. Everything else got on like the big, we're gonna be Alfonso Cuarón, like gray darkness.
David Yates goes into something like that also. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but this and The Sorcerer's Stone were definitely more kids movies, and they have a bit more like a possible like grayscale color scheme almost than the others.
There's actually like oranges and like reds and greens and color. Ooh.
Yeah,
but they're also more blandly shot.
Well, and like the really like towards the climaxes, they both like. But okay, doesn't matter. Part where this thing goes haywire is at the end when I think there's a point, and then I noticed when like Harry stabbed Tom Riddle's diary, like like the color scheme briefly went black and white, then back to color. It's like that can't be
right. that early 2000 CGI is pretty rough. The Quidditch matches are. Oh boy. Although I think they are better in this one than in Sorcerer's Stone. Let me tell you, when I was rewatching these about a year ago, seeing the Quidditch match in Sorcerer's Stone was that was a rough moment.
Maybe I should revisit these because these were kind of not integral to my childhood, but sort of features of them.
Well, I mean, and this was also very similar to like Sorcerer's Stone and some of the others, where like it would like mention some things and then they would come back around. So like you have this like very much sort of like eclipsed sort of shape of the movie. So nothing is left unused, and I guess that's good.
When I was rewatching these movies last year, I think I reported on most of them. So anyone who's listening,
I think their like Twitter posts of them are still up.
Oh all my Twitter and Instagram posts about them I'm reading off of them right now. Just to recap what I thought about this one last time I watched it. Funny enough, I ranked it 5th out of 8.
That's about where it belongs. What was 6th, 7th, and 8th?
I ranked it above, in this order, Goblet of Fire, Sorcerer's Stone, and Order of the Phoenix.
Really? Sorcerer's...
I was not grooving with Sorcerer's Stone that time around. I don't know. That one is... I think Chamber of Secrets smooths over the rough spots a little bit better than that one does. Chamber of Secrets feels a little bit more cohesive as a thing, and...
The stakes are a bit higher.
The stakes are...
Like
the stakes are higher, and... There is, like, kind of a campy element to Chamber of Secrets, I think, that does kind of play in spots.
Build-up to, like, us seeing the snake is legitimately good build-up. Like, when you enter in the cavern and they go for the bathroom and so forth, it's legitimately good build-up.
That stuff works. Yeah. Like, the chamber looks great. The whole thing with, like, the basilisk, it's like a giant, like, Jurassic Park, like, style head. Yeah. Like, I really go for that. Obviously not a great movie, but...
No.
But maybe none of them are.
Yeah. The closest one to it is, I think, Half-Blood Prince.
Yeah, Half-Blood Prince gets the closest to the line, but even then is still...
Maybe it's Deathly Hallows Part 1 also.
I like Deathly Hallows Part 1 a lot.
I did too.
I haven't seen that one.
It's so good. Although this movie did make me question, why do these movies exist? Like what purpose do these have? And I feel like their only purpose is to exist. Is for bankroll, perhaps.
And there's something about like hero's journey, chosen one narrative, etc., etc. It's and most of the things that were in the books sort of show up at some point.
Yeah, well, that's one thing about Chamber of Secrets, the movie, is it is very faithful to the book for better and for worse.
Mm-hmm. So is that all you have seen for what we've been watching? time to talk about a movie I really have no business talking about. Disney's 1997 sort of post-Renaissance feature, Hercules.
Well, the beginning of the end for the Renaissance.
We'll put it that way. Gorgeous movie.
Oh, yeah.
Gorgeous movie that, I mean, wonky CGI here and there, but like...
Yeah, I kind of don't like the animation style in that one as much as the others.
There's a point in this movie where, like, Hades unleashes the Titans, and sort of, like, it's I think Lindsay Ellis explains, kind of like a mashup of every kind of, like, great catastrophe in Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And they come out, and how they're animated is just so unique. They're just so massive, and they just rip up the countryside. I'm just like, I haven't seen this in a Disney movie in a long time. And just really gorgeous to look at, and especially, like, all, like, the background designs are just, like, super intricate and kind of like these sort of neo-Gothic remixes of Greek classicism, and it's really, really eye-catching. And there's the Scarfe designs, the guy who did Pink Floyd's The Wall, and they all look really eye-catching.
Yeah.
Hercules routinely looks like he's dead inside, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, well, Reed, I can see where you're coming from, but I also really enjoyed like the design and the kind of the style of this movie.
The plot of it is, it kind of feels like they're making it up as they go. It's kind of just like, oh, Ex Machina here, Ex Machina there, like, we're going to try and make him immortal. But no, he has to drink every single part of the bottle for some fucking reason. So now he still has a strength. Okay. He can become immortal again if he becomes a true hero. What the fuck is a true hero? Okay. He becomes, like, rich and famous and buff. Is that a true hero? No, he still has to do some vague, hopey, changey thingy that Zeus tells him to do. Okay. There's a lot of like it's kind of trite, sort of ticking clock stuff in it.
Yeah.
It feels like something kind of it's a plot put on railroad tracks, yet also on autopilot.
Right.
Well,
it's really contrived in a way Disney movies really aren't sometimes. Like, typically they do find like some character or organic reasoning for something, but this kind of is like the sort of Disney plot, like basic hero's journey plot, like gone sentient in kind of the worst way at times.
Well, I mean, Deus Ex Machina, God out of the machine. This movie has many gods. Therefore, many Deus Ex Machinas. Makes sense.
I suppose so. But the thing about this, like, I think Lindsay Ellis, like, pretty much describes it perfectly in her giant...
Lindsay Ellis has the definitive take on Disney's Hercules.
Yeah, and I pretty much agree with every part of it. Is like, there are lots of pieces of this movie that are rather entertaining, though.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think Hades is all that great.
I love Hades.
James Wood has some great readings, and there's some great lines in this movie, but most of what he does in this movie is kind of scowl at his useless minions and say, brr, that Hercules that I'll never meet, until like there's like 10 minutes left in the movie.
But now, I recognize that is not a good dramatic choice, but I enjoy it a lot, just because Hades growling at his useless minions is very entertaining.
James Wood was paid to do like a funny villain, and guess what? He did his job very well. I'll give him that. But what it creates is that like Hercules and Hades don't meet until there's like 10 to 15 minutes left in the movie.
It's true.
And he just kind of shows up, and he's being very reasonable. He says, like, hey, your Whoopi that you've only known for 2 minutes of screen time, she's going to be hurt if you don't give me your powers, but only for 24 hours. And, like, Hercules has no fucking idea that the world's going to end soon. So, like, he really has no reason to be like, oh, other than just, oh, okay, sure. It's only 24 hours. I can go back to making bank the next day. Like, he has no reason really to say no other than Hades is coded bad. He's on fire.
That is, true.
But you know, this movie has a pretty decent femme fatale.
Yeah, right?
Megara has a compelling backstory. She's well, like, acted. She has a really nice sort of melancholic song near the end. Like, she has an arc. From the point of view of her, this could be a pretty decent character study, to be honest.
Yeah,
character journey.
You're kind of right about that.
The problem is it's Hercules movie, and Hercules has no character other than what people tell him.
That is also true.
So it's okay.
Yeah, no, empirically this movie is like at best okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of I am very much with Lindsay Ellis on this. Like, there's a lot of stuff about this movie that I enjoy quite a bit.
Yeah, like I love the backgrounds, I love the animation, like everything is like routinely gorgeous, and the songs are pretty good. I have no fucking clue why gospel was their choice, but hey, they're all fun to listen to.
0 to Hero is a fucking banger, man. I'll listen to that anytime.
That one's great. Like, Megara's song is great. I don't know why they gave Danny DeVito a song, but hey.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, it's a bit more sexist than I'd like, but you know, it's there's a lot of like little pervy Danny DeVito gawking at nymphs and Megara.
Yeah, that's a little.
I'm not really on board with, but you know, it's okay.
Disney really didn't know when to stop with the wisecracking sidekicks at this point in time.
Yeah, but they also tried to give him a character arc, which is just weird.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I don't know, like, this sort of comes in comparison, like, what we were talking about with Don Bluth films, is that I think with Don Bluth films, like, they're rough around the edges and kind of Chinsky at times. They really don't have, like, a Disney sheen. There's sometimes just kind of, narratively, they kind of feel like, oh, what now? Sometimes, but there's a real passion to that.
Yeah.
There's a real sense of, like, all the people who were involved with this really wanted to fucking make it.
Mm-hmm.
Don Bluth had a vision and he wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, like, the actual backstory of it is Ron Clements and Musker had to make this movie so they can make Treasure Planet.
Right.
That's the backstory of this movie, and it shows in every single frame, because it really does feel like, okay, we have to make this, get this, sure, Alan Menken can make songs, that's some compelling concept art, we can do that, it looks pretty. That's about it. You can just tell they just really weren't too caring in the development of it, which kind of makes it, but it still has like that kind of Disney sheen, so it just really isn't charming either. So I think I don't want to quite call it a no man's land of a movie, because there is quite a few enjoyable things about it, especially the art style.
Yeah,
but overall, it's pretty. It's lesser, certainly.
Yeah, so. Yeah, I definitely agree. Lots of stuff about it that I like, but not top tier by any means.
Yeah, but go watch that giant Lindsay Ellis video essay if you want to hear more. She says everything I could say about it and more, and far more succinctly.
Yeah.
So go watch that. I don't like to do that very often, but Lindsay Ellis does, in fact, have the definitive like hot take on Hercules.
Yes, for sure.
That's all I've been watching. I wanted to watch Brief Encounter, but shopping today took way longer than I have any reason to give.
Sorry, I did watch Brief Encounter. I forgot to bring it up.
Is that something you just kind of want to do for what I've been watching, or do you want to sort of intertwine that into our David Lean discussion?
I don't know. I don't know how much it'll tie into what we're going to talk about with Lawrence of Arabia, so I'll just say it's very good. The acting in it is great. It's a beautifully filmed movie. Like, right off the bat, you can see that David Lean has an incredible eye. I don't know. Maybe we can do that in the future for an episode even. I'd be curious to see what you guys might think about it. So we'll see. Okay. But I liked it quite a bit. Anyway, let's get to the main event here. We're talking 1962's Lawrence of Arabia, the epic to end all epics.
The cut we saw was 3 hours and 47 minutes.
Did it include the overture and the exit music and all that business?
Yeah. Okay. This is hard.
Where to begin with this movie?
Maybe I can start.
Okay.
Oh, Reed, you want to start? You want to give like your initial hot take?
I wrote some notes down from the beginning towards the beginning of the movie, and I can just like possibly sum up just like some of the more like prominent ones. And we don't need to talk about the like weird like time, like the weird time jump when like you're like at one point in like 1930s.
1935.
Yeah, well,
yeah, and then you suddenly jump back 20 years. We don't need again. That's fine. Good set dressing. There's good set dressing in the beginning. Wonderful props.
Well, every frame of this movie is just overflowing with just like people and just designs and costumes and just like every bit of like classic Hollywood ephemera turned up to 11.
2, T.E. Lawrence, and he's also a careless fuck with the stiff upper lip. Of course, a lot of these British people have.
But he is not the stiffest of the upper lips. Whereas I feel like half the British General Staff's dialogue could be summed up with.
Yes. Okay. Okay, and then 2 more, and this goes without saying. Especially if you view it, and what's the date? 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Oh yeah, Alec Guinness brownface is not great. It's not great.
I'm gonna say this.
Can I get to one more point?
Oh, sure.
Kind of going off that, and then going off some other things. This felt very Tintin in the Congo-esque.
I am not going to go there. I do not think that at all. Because Tintin in the Congo is overwhelmingly bad.
That's true.
But, okay. Let's just put it this way, in cultural context. This movie came out 5 years after the Suez Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
This film came out during the Algerian War. This film came out pretty much as America was ramping up my timeline with Vietnam kind of fucked up. When did America sort of start ramping up their involvement in Vietnam?
It was a little bit after.
This was around this. It was 62, 64.
Yeah, because the French had been out of there since 54.
Yeah, and this was also the time of former African colonies rapidly gaining their independence.
Yeah, I think very shortly after. I think somewhere in this time span, the Congo becomes independent at the very least, along with several other African colonies. So, I don't think we can just look at this and be like, oh, in the harsh light of 2018, this movie doesn't stand up to scrutiny. I think even by the standards of its time, it's kind of a bit wacky stick. To put it in a John Oliver context.
Care to explain what you mean by that?
Here I want to explain. This is the white savior movie.
Yes.
Well,
this is Mr. T.E. Lawrence, Mr. Fine Englishman, come to show Arabs how to Arab.
Yes. To a degree, yes.
And it is full of people in brownface, and it routinely disparages Arab peoples. And it cuts to Cairo, which is the capital today of Egypt, a nation that speaks Arabic and could be considered part of sort of pan-Arabic nationalism. It cuts to it like it's fucking Edinburgh or London.
Seville, in this case.
Yeah, and it's actually shot in Seville, which is something else.
Well, and also with that, a lot of this movie was shot in Spain.
Yeah, which is not atrocious, per se.
No.
These are things I just kind of want to get out of the way, because I do believe that there was just quite a lot of, like, colonialist bunk buried into this movie, and I just kind of don't want to shy away from that, even though I will, in turn, sort of bestow upon the rich narrative joys of this set.
Now, nor should we. I think it's important to talk about this, viewing the movie in a modern context, especially because this is one of those movies that, like, it is still held up as, you know, an unimpeachable, like, greatest movie ever.
I don't think there really is a, like, internet, like, hot take somewhere saying, like, oh, Lawrence of Arabia is racist.
Yeah, it seems to have largely escaped that criticism, and it did hit me, like, this time. Like, I was watching it, and I was kind of like, okay, this movie's indictment of colonialism would hit a lot better if most of the main Arabs were not played by white people.
Yeah, and more than that, just, like, how the Arabs are treated is sometimes atrocious. Like, how they're portrayed, they always, at one point they say, like, oh, they don't understand paper money. And I'm just like, ooh.
Now... And don't forget towards the end with the Arab National Council and just like the opening.
And that's just shown to be like this comedy of errors that has to be where they have to bring in British engineers because only the white colonialists could ever figure out this administrative thing.
Now, here's what I will say. Yes, that part of the movie did give me pause on this go-round. The whole Arab Council thing, I was kind of like, okay. But what I will say is that I think it's framed less as... Now, here's what I think separates this movie from something like Birth of a Nation. And I realize I'm walking a very fine line here.
Yeah,
but,
well, this is not Birth of a Nation for many reasons. I'm curious what you have to say as to why that is.
Okay, well, here's my first, okay, first of all, yes, lots of brown face in this movie. Yeah. Is that okay? No. I do not want to defend that. What I will say is this. The actors who are playing Arabic characters, for the most part, there are exceptions, mainly those two boys who kind of follow Lawrence around everywhere. Those are, not great. But...
Yeah, they feel like something right out of a minstrel drama.
I wouldn't quite go that far, but it's
kind of,
certainly it has not held up well. But I do think, for the most part, they are playing these people with respect and with, dignity and, like, a kind of, I don't, this is not minstrelsy. This is not, we are not making fun of Arab people. We are not, consciously, playing up any stereotypes here. We are trying to give this, an element of honesty. Whether they fully succeed in that is a different conversation, but I do think the intent behind it is far, far better than a lot of depictions of black people and of other races that you had around this time.
Yeah, they are not putting on a thick accent, per se. They are not, scrunching up their face, or, they don't put them in really heavy makeup, which, if anything, makes it far more obvious. It's not a parody of an Arab. That being said, the dialogue they have to say and the characters they have to play are not as honest as those performances.
Well...
I don't want to put this on Alec Guinness. Or the other, fine actors whom have to don brown face. They are not blameless per se, but they are quite respectful in what they have to do.
Well, hold on now. I mean, Alec Guinness in particular, I think Prince Faisal is a pretty well-drawn character in this movie. You don't think, that moment where he's, talking to Lawrence and he's like, I think you're another one of these desert-loving English. He feels real to me. I think that character is pretty well drawn.
To an extent, sure.
There's also just scenes of him being like a wheel and dealer, and kind of you get the sense of he kind of goes where the tides go.
I don't feel that way. But sorry, Reed, what?
I was just backing off what John said. Sort of going with the flow. That's especially with the end. When we sort of get the context better with the infamous Sykes-Picot agreement. But anyways.
Okay, I want to talk about Sykes-Picot.
Okay, well, what? I just want to say one other thing first, which is that the other thing is that I do think that, the way they portray, the Arabs' interaction with modern culture it doesn't feel to me so much like they're mocking them, so much as they're saying okay, these are people who live, in a particular way that, Westerners view as primitive, and it makes sense that they would not understand fully how to run a telephone system, or they would not be necessarily familiar with paper money. I get how that I get how that, like, you see that now and you would be like, I get how that would feel offensive. I do understand that. And, you know, speaking as a white person, I realize I am not fully qualified to comment upon this sort of thing. But to me,
neither are any of us.
Yeah. I'm just would like to say, to me, I think that feels more, not as, like, openly disrespectful as maybe you're giving it credit for.
Okay. To that thing, I will say this. There's a scene in this movie where I think one of the British generals who says, like, they put up camp and they don't understand that they're in the range of modern weapons. They don't understand modern warfare. To which I say, yes, because this is World War I. No one really understood modern warfare at this point, especially Arab tribes at this point. I don't think it's as much a question of content as it is a question of framing. They are framed as primitive. Like, even in these things as, like, their logical perspective, even from the logical perception of, like, yeah, they probably wouldn't know how to run a telephone service. They probably wouldn't know how to deal with biplanes. But the way it is framed is always through the lens of the British Empire.
That is true.
Yes.
And with that, I want to talk about Sykes-Picot.
Okay.
Sykes-Picot, if you're not aware of it, and this is something they talk about in the movie, is an agreement that cut up Arabia, or at least sort of like the Arabia that sort of makes up the Middle East right north of Saudi Arabia.
It basically carved out what is now Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan.
Yes. And it split it between British and French influences, and it is widely regarded as one of these disastrous treaties that, destabilized the Middle East. And the movie is fairly honest about this.
Yeah.
When it comes up, T. Lawrence is rather horrified by it. However, everything we see prior suggests that Arab peoples can't run a state and need Papa England to help them, or Papa France to help them, even despite its lip service against it, which is well-intentioned lip service. I think I applaud this movie for discussing Sykes-Picot. I applaud this movie for somewhat taking a stance against it. The problem is the framework of the movie, the ideological points of view render it mute and sort of render it as little more than lip service, especially because T.E. Lawrence is the only person that the camera seems to trust.
It's the only reference frame, essentially. Yeah.
Because everyone else is either like an Arab to not be trusted, or schmarmy English officers who care not for, like, the common Arab. And it is all about, like, T.E. Lawrence as the white savior to come in and help the Arabs and be the champion of the Arabs, because the Arabs cannot do it themselves. And I don't think the movie has no clarity about that, because there are some moments where the film criticizes that kind of savior complex.
Yeah.
However, it provides no framework to support it, because there is no. Because I'm going to compare this to Colonel Blimp right now, because I think Colonel Blimp is a good comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Because both of these are movies about men of war having to deal with warfare changing and dealing with cultures and nations that aren't their own through personal lenses. I mean, like, Germany is far different from Arabia.
I was going to say, Colonel Blimp is helped by the fact that it has no colonized cultures in it.
Exactly. Yes. I fully say that. But Lawrence of Arabia is dearly missing an Anton Walbrook to come in and say, you know nothing.
Yes, that is something that I will acknowledge.
And with that, this movie cannot help but fit under the white savior narrative.
Now, what I will say...
That is my huge sort of nail and coffin critique of this movie. And I will allow you to defend that.
All right. Now, I don't think anything that you're saying is invalid. I do think the movie makes an attempt at that sort of character with Omar Sharif's character.
Yes, I agree.
And also note, Omar Sharif is Egyptian technically, although I did look up his heritage and it's like not entirely Arabic, but that at least is
it's as close as we get.
It's an attempt.
Yes.
Regardless, his character I do think provides a good counterbalance. I think that scene after that whole like massacre with the whole like no prisoners guy, and where you see
brilliant scene, by the way. Brilliant scene.
Lawrence is covered in blood. He's just like helped perpetuate this total massacre of a Turkish kind of unit. And you get that scene with him and Omar Sharif and the journalist, where Omar Sharif is kind of like spitting Lawrence's words back at him. Like, the barbarous Arabs, who but they. I think that sort of thing, which does occur with some frequency in the movie.
Exactly. I am not going to say those scenes don't exist.
I think that keeps the movie from being just a total mishap in terms of this sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't think this is a movie that needs necessarily be left to the dustbins of history.
Yes, I agree.
I just find like these narratives to be far more troubling than like what counterbalance it's providing us. And that being said, this movie does have nuance.
Yeah.
This movie will criticize T.E. Lawrence sometimes. This movie does sometimes show its main character as something flawed and nuanced and something new for the epic screen.
Now, okay, so putting all the colonialist, business aside, which again, very valid discussion to have about this movie. I will also say that this movie also, the reason I love this movie, and the reason I still love this movie, and the reason that I think it is, valued as much as it is by the filmic community, is that this movie is very unique in how it combines a very intimate, very complex, sophisticated character study with perhaps the grandest sweeping epic imagery ever put to film.
Mm-hmm. It turns into a single man as a national narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Which is part of why this movie can be so problematic at times. But that is something unique.
Yeah.
And there are times where it's quite ravishing. Like there are some times where like we see T. Lawrence interacting with like the best scenes in this movie are I think when he's like interacting with the high command in Cairo, because that's when he's not dealing with a colonial cultures and things of that sort.
Right.
We are in a purely British world, and we're criticizing that British world, and we're analyzing Lawrence, and we're sort of like fomenting this very rich, very very porous world. Mm-hmm. And that is something that is very interesting to watch sometimes.
Yeah. I think that, the reason that I fell in love with this movie is the way that it blends those two modes. Like, I think that T.E. Lawrence, like, in this movie, he is an enigma, but he is one of the closest things I've seen in a movie to a real person that you don't personally know, whose motives you can kind of guess at, but will really never fully understand. And I saw this movie with two of my roommates, and one of them did bring up this point to me, which is that the movie does not fully adopt a thesis on Lawrence as a person, which I get as a criticism, and I understand why that is frustrating.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I will also say that I do think the way in which that they fully commit to not having a thesis on him, they know some things about him. Like, you can pick up on a lot of stuff, like, his whole kind of sadomasochistic kind of bend, his, egotism,
might be a homosexual.
Well, probably was until that whole Turkish Bay incident. It has this very clear kind of savior complex, and I don't know. I just think that, like, he is one of the most fascinating screen characters that I have seen, in my opinion. Feel free to disagree with me.
Okay. Here's my issue with him. Is that, first of all, the performance by Peter O'Toole.
Yeah.
Which is very sort of as waifish as a male is allowed to be in 1962.
Worth noting, Noel Coward, screenwriter of Brief Encounter, commented upon seeing this movie. He said to Peter O'Toole, if you had been any prettier, it would have been called Florence of Arabia.
Like, he is, like, every shot he has, like, starry eyes, and he talks to, like, every character in the movie as if he's about to bed them. Like, everyone wants to fuck everyone in this movie.
And I don't have a problem with that.
I do not have a problem with that either. The problem with that is that it is sometimes very difficult to read Lawrence.
Yes.
And that is fine to a certain point. Like, I can completely get behind a 4-hour movie that maybe doesn't have, like, an ultimate thesis on a character if it still, like, richly develops that character.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is, I think this is something I talked about before in regards to sort of colonialist narratives, but the lack of something of an Anton Walbrook character to say you have no idea what you're doing strips Lawrence of what nuance could really be there. Because right now, it's sort of, in this mold, it's kind of like every once in a while somebody says maybe he doesn't know everything, maybe he's not a savior, but everyone always goes back to, like, oh, that incredible T.E. Lawrence, that Lawrence of Arabia, that man in the white gown and the gold trim. Look at him.
Yes, but what I will say is that I think that characters in this movie lionize him. I don't think the movie lionizes him, and I don't think the filmmakers do either.
I'm not sure about that, because I think the complete lack of characters who just simply call him out and say, you are a British man with the pastiest skin a man could imagine. Who the fuck are you?
Uh-huh.
And not being coded as some colonial subject or some, like, stiff upper lip British general who simply doesn't understand the conditions of the desert Arabia. It completely lacks anything of that. And it completely lacks a counterpoint, a proper unfiltered counterpoint.
Okay, unfiltered, yes, but I don't think it completely lacks a counterpoint, like I was saying.
I'm not going to say it as, like I said in text, I'm not going to say it has no clarity around Lawrence. I just really wish it had more.
Uh-huh.
I just really wish we got more angles to this guy. And, like, in 4 hours, and when I'm saying, like, I'm not sure what their thesis is, and I'm also not quite sure what their, like, sub-thesis or even, like, or even sort of analysis of them is, I think that's something of a failure.
All right.
That's not to say that Lawrence has the potential to be a very fascinating subject, and at times he is portrayed as something really rich. Like, that No Prisoners Massacre scene, brilliant, and that's a reproach throughout at far more times in the movie could have rendered just what you do describe as one of the greatest character studies I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. But that just isn't there most of the time, no. And I really wish it was.
All right. Well,
I hope what I've been saying is coherent.
No, it is. Reed, do you want to elaborate more?
I don't want this to turn into, like, me and Reed saying, like, this movie is racist and bad and no one should see it.
You know what?
There's sometimes before movies, and I don't think this is quite one of them. I think there's a lot of punk to talk about, but I don't think this is quite something we can just throw to the dustbin of history. Reed, do you want to say?
Yeah, let me just step back for a moment, and then I'll step back forward, and we'll continue.
Oh, certainly, just like the movie.
This movie, sort of, like, historically speaking, this movie definitely seems like an artifact, of its time of 1962.
Mm-hmm. For better and for worse.
Yeah, for better and for worse. I'm not sure how much of David Lean's own personal feelings about his time period and about and about how he feels about his Britain. They may come across in this movie, but I'm not sure. There was a part where the British generals do talk about the Suez Canal, and mind you, this was years after the Suez Crisis.
But only 5 years after the Suez Crisis.
Yeah, right.
But I don't want to say that, though. I don't want to say, like, this is something, like, of its era that just hasn't aged as well. I think it does have narratives that were harmful even at the time. Like, any era is harmful. Absolutely. Narratives about, like, the savagery of Arabs is harmful, no matter what the time period is. And I don't think, and like the 60s were the era of like fuck the war in Vietnam, save free Africa, the Algerian War, like these wars of decolonization were happening all over the world.
Yes.
So a narrative that sort of this film doesn't so much celebrate colonialism as it does justify it. And a narrative around justifications.
Okay.
Justifications are harmful at this time.
Yeah.
I would push back against the argument that the movie justifies colonialism. Okay, I can see where you're coming from there. I can, but I do think that the movie's ultimate argument as regards colonialism is against it. Even if it is not as strong as maybe it should be.
It's definitely not as strong as it should be. You're right on that.
I'm not sure if it is anti-colonial. It has anti-colonial thoughts and anti-colonial points of view at times. I'm not arguing against that. Certainly, I don't think this is not. I don't think this is a movie without nuance. It's not a propaganda film.
If we can't say it's anti-colonialist, I would at the very least say it is not pro-colonialist.
I am willing to step at that middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, anything but anti-colonialism is something of an argument for colonialism.
Yes, I guess you can say that. Yes.
Yeah, yes. I'm trying not to twist. I'm not trying to twist all your arguments because if you love this movie, that's perfectly fine, and if you don't think it has the harmful narratives that we think it does, that's perfectly.
I'm not saying it doesn't because I think it does, but I also think the movie has plenty of merit, and I'm not saying these things should be overlooked at all. I think that they are important to talk about. I think they are important to acknowledge.
I'm not calling you a racist for liking this movie. Like, you can like this movie all you want, even with the narratives it does have, and still be a good person. Like, there are movies that I like that have kind of bunk that I'm not quite sure about. Like, hell, even Colonel Blimp has some things I'm not always savory about.
Okay, yeah. Well, to return to a point we were getting at earlier.
Yes.
So, going back to the whole Lawrence as a character thing, I guess this really just comes down to a difference of opinion, because you see this as a bug and I see it as a feature. Like, I think it's incredible that we can have an almost 4-hour movie that has a character like that, where we can spend so long trying to delve into him, trying to make sense of his actions and of his, personality quirks and all that stuff, and still not fully get there. I think that it is admirable that David Lean made the movie that way. Totally understand why people would see that as a cop-out. Like, I can understand that perspective. I just don't have that perspective. I think that is fully a choice of this movie, and a choice that I think it works for me. I can't speak for anyone else there.
My criticism isn't that first of all, I'm going to make sure that none of my issues with this movie have to do with the fact that it's 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But my issue with that is I am completely fine with that kind of character study in a 4-hour movie. I am completely fine with that. I completely understand it as an artistic choice. I would love that as an artistic choice if there was just more clarity, if there were just more point of view, if the movie just didn't seem to favor him as a white savior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If there was just a lot more than that, and there is more to there than like Lawrence the White Savior. I agree to that.
Yeah.
And this just was there was like a far less of the White Savior in this than what there is.
I totally understand that. What I will also say is that I do think it helps them somewhat that woven into the text of the movie is the fact that Lawrence so badly wants to be a white savior.
Yes, that is completely true, and the movie does pay more than just lip service to that. I completely agree.
Yeah, that's pretty much my final word on that. I mean, again, I can see where you're coming from, and I don't think your argument is invalid here. It works for me, and again, like I am constantly like going back to it again, and even like picking up on more things than I had because I hadn't watched this movie in several years. I think I must have been
very
like
difficult thing to watch multiple times.
Yeah, and I think this was the fourth time I've watched this movie all the way through. I first saw it early in high school. I watched it a couple times, and then I got it on Blu-ray. I watched it again. So this was probably the longest I'd gone in between viewings of this movie since I saw it for the first time. And I am still kind of floored by like how kind of sophisticated and complex both the story and the characters in this movie are. Like it is a very intricate narrative with a lot of like kind of weaving threads and dynamics and lots of things at play. Lawrence, again, just like one of the most complicated characters that I've seen in a movie.
He is a nuanced character. I will argue that.
And it just totally works for me. And I just view this as, one of the towering works of cinema. And I think that perhaps in the future, this will be something that people approach with the attitude that I approach something like Birth of a Nation or, say, Battleship Potemkin, which, Battleship Potemkin is, and maybe that's even like a more accurate comparison point in terms of.
I think I'm allowed to say Birth of the Nation is one of the worst films of all time, purely for what it is and what it did. I honestly really don't care about what technical achievements are hidden in it, for just the sheer horridness that it is.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think people always talk about like the technical innovations of Birth of a Nation, although people tend to hold up now more. People tend to kind of shove off Birth of a Nation off to the side and kind of prop up Intolerance instead as kind of the representative movie of D.W. Griffith's innovations. Yes. But like Battleship Potemkin, I've said it before, I'll say it again, is a work of communist propaganda that happens to have some great, technical innovations and achievements in editing. And because of those innovations, it's held up as one of the all-time greatest movies. I have seen that movie, and I don't think anyone now needs to see it. I do not feel that way about Lawrence of Arabia. I can possibly foresee the day when people will think that about Lawrence of Arabia. But I kind of hope that the movie will endure as something that can be viewed with the caveat of this is problematic for these reasons. We are not dismissing these things. However, it is still a monumental achievement. That is kind of how I view it now.
Yeah, I don't. Okay. I'm not going to approach it from that. My perspective of it is that this is a very unique and intriguing movie with a lot of things in it that are very admirable and very ambitious. It is also a technical marvel with some of the greatest filmmaking you will ever see. Like the match cuts in it, the sheer scale of it is just oozing out of every frame. It is an experience to watch it.
Yeah.
With like the intermission and the overture and just the sheer just overwhelmingness of it. Even in like on my shitty TV, it still feels like an event.
Yeah.
And very few movies do that. I will argue this movie's technical achievements. I just do not feel that this movie can quite escape its colonialist narratives and its racist, sometimes overtones. Like, there's so much brown face There is so much brown face in this movie. And it errs on the side of the white savior far more than it criticizes it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of there. Like, I think this is something that we can mine for a lot of, like, interesting technical and storytelling reasons that we can teach in school. But we should also qualify it at every chance and say that's racist, that's problematic, and we can't just say, like, these things aren't problematic because some things in the movie are good.
No, and that's not what I'm saying at all.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And you aren't. And nor do I think you're a racist or problematic for liking this movie.
Well, I appreciate that. Don't want to dismiss anything you've said whatsoever. Mm-hmm. But I do think that, with the proper context, this is something that we should be able to view as a work. And I think, honestly, like, one of the maybe even more accurate comparison points would be, like, this is going to sound odd, but, something like, the Looney Tunes cartoons that, are kind of known for their stereotypes. By the way, the stereotypes in those, which I would argue are much more explicitly harmful than anything in Lawrence of Arabia. Again, like, with proper context, some of those cartoons, not all of them, certainly not all of them, are still worth viewing and worth preserving.
Well, everything is worth preserving, even the really bad stuff, because sometimes it's actually really important to preserve the bad stuff so we can go back and, like, break our, like, nostalgia goggles.
Yeah. Again, like, with the right environment, with the right context, I think that this movie is definitely still worth viewing, if not unabashedly, unqualifiedly, celebrating as people have done for, like, the last 50 years.
Yeah, I think we should keep. I think you're right. I think we should keep teaching it in schools. I think we should keep showing it in schools. But someone should also still write that internet hot take. This movie's racist. I still think that needs to be written and that needs to be trafficked in. And I think that something like that needs to be shown alongside, like, our glorious appraisal of the glorious match cut.
Yeah.
I hope what I've been saying is not just some, like, flaming hot take.
No, not at all. I think we've had a fair and balanced and nuanced discussion of this movie.
Yep.
I think when that hot take is written, I will definitely read it.
Maybe I should write it, or maybe I shouldn't, because
yeah,
I'm one of the realest motherfuckers I've ever known.
I think someone bit more, with the cultural viewpoint, a bit more qualified than us to write that, should do that. Also worth addressing that there are no women in this movie at all.
No, I don't think there's a film that fails the Bechdel test more thoroughly than this.
Yes.
Though I do think some would argue that no representation is better than bad representation.
I think, honestly, we as a society have kind of erred on that end. But, I think the only female voices are kind of just screaming in this movie, and maybe that's worse.
Yeah.
I don't think this movie deserves a pedestal, but I also don't think it deserves to be buried either.
Well, I think it deserves a pedestal with caveats. That's what I will say.
Maybe it'll be like one of those, like, kind of, I don't think this is quite a perfect comparison, but like one of those, like, Civil War monuments where we put, like, lots of, like, historical context written all alongside it.
Oh boy. Oh.
It's not a perfect, but that's what they're doing with all, like, the Columbus statues around America.
Well, definitely a pedestal with a shit ton of asterisks.
Yeah, so that's... Reed, do you have any finishing thoughts? Do you think this movie should be buried? Because you were not having a fun time watching it.
Probably not. There are worse.
Oh yeah, because Birth of a Nation exists.
And that should be buried.
There are very few movies worse than Birth of a Nation as far as, like, harmful narratives are concerned.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like, as a story, this wasn't as solid. This is... I don't know.
It's oddly aimless at times.
Yeah. And that's what kind of made it.
And I think you're right, that can be seen as a feature, but I think in some cases those are bugs in this movie.
Yeah, and that kind of made my attention definitely drift off.
Well, I would disagree. I wouldn't call it aimless, but I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that I never had to come to the point that like this is a 4-hour movie and we can tighten it up, because I don't think we need to. I think it's allowed to be kind of like this kind of slow, long in the tooth, giant overture, intermission, ending music, epic.
Yeah, well,
that's fun. That's completely valid.
I disagree, but that's valid. But that's valid.
Okay.
I don't like every part of that, but I think that's completely valid, and I don't think I really have a pedestal to really criticize that on as strongly as I do the other harmful things about the movie.
Some people have less tolerance for those sorts of epics, and that's okay, Reed.
Yeah, I think of all like the epics I've watched, this is by far one of the more watchable.
Yeah, think so.
Yeah,
no, I that all completely works for me. I don't know, and I think also like the way it's split, like with the intermission placed where it is, the two halves feel very distinct and feel they still feel like parts of a whole, but they feel they feel kind of like their own entities to a certain degree.
You could slap the end at where intermission is, and I don't think people would walk out angry.
Yeah, no. But I do think that the second half like takes this movie to a whole other level.
Yeah, I think this movie is incalculably weaker without its second half.
I would totally agree with that.
So, that's our rambling, somewhat hot-takey opinions on Lawrence of Arabia.
I don't think it's a hot take. That's a term we throw around a lot, but I think that I think we did okay, all things considered.
Yeah. I kind of wish there were more discussions like ours on the internet somewhere, other than the match cut. It's a really good match cut.
Seek out those takes. I don't want, and share your thoughts. I people out there. I don't want to be the only voice in this discussion here.
Yeah. I am really excited to see this have a critical reappraisal or damning. Whatever the critical community deems that to be, or honestly, whatever the American Arab community deems that to be.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's kind of their show when it comes to that, but that is something we have no authority on.
Yeah,
and as much as where film studies caps.
And again, just to kind of put a button on this, this movie is about a white man who, in history, went to quote-unquote Arabia and did these things.
Yes.
Now, obviously, there are better ways to tell that story, and perhaps more worthwhile stories to tell. But the story it is telling, I think, is a worthy one for, at least in terms of how it is executed.
I was going to get on big tangents about this, about like how it's historically inaccurate, and there were many people like T. Lawrence helping the Arab Revolt, and how like T. Lawrence knew about Sykes-Picot far before the movie showed he did, and things
also
of that.
True.
But honestly, it's a fucking 4-hour David Lead movie.
It's a movie, and I don't like getting into the weeds of like, oh, this isn't historically accurate.
Yeah. I try not to do that, but I think those are points where like the movie would be stronger if it was more historically accurate.
Sure.
Yeah.
And like I feel like if it like addressed those, it could possibly make this an even stronger story.
Yeah,
I'm not going to disagree with that.
Maybe there's some like great like postmodern like musing on this movie to be made at some point.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, well, that's Lawrence of Arabia.
I think it got the talk that it deserved.
Yeah, I think so too. And I just again we don't want to bury this movie.
No.
So there you go. Anyway.
Oh, God, what do we do next?
I was gonna say, how do we want to follow this episode?
Yeah, this felt like a final episode of the podcast in many ways.
All right. So actually, seriously, what do we want to do next time?
Do we want to take the brief encounter thread and run with it, and maybe do another British genre piece?
Oh, we can. I'd be open to that.
Yeah.
Can we save Bridge Over River Kwai for like further down the road?
Oh, we are not doing the Bridge Over the River Kwai anytime soon.
I don't blame you for that.
Does that movie have any of the narratives of?
I think you would like that movie a lot, and I think it's less problematic.
Okay.
It does have, it's, again, been a long time since I've watched that movie, and I've only seen it once.
Yeah.
It does have some portrayal of Japanese characters that might be problematic, but it does take place during World War II, and the main characters are British prisoners of war, so I don't think it doesn't have the colonial element that Lawrence of Arabia does.
Yeah, well, here's the difference. The Japanese were colonial imperialists themselves,
right,
and the Arabs were not.
Yes.
So
yeah, I think that I think you would like that movie a lot. I think that
I'm still willing to say that. I'm not willing to. I'm still interested in David Lean as a director.
Yeah, it's curious and perhaps unfortunate that his most kind of towering cinematic achievement is also one of his most problematic.
Yeah, but boy, isn't there a lot of those?
Yeah.
So, Eisenstein.
True.
D.W. Griffith.
All right, we don't need to open that can of worms back up. Okay, what do we want to pair Brief Encounter with?
Well, actually, what are some other things like on the list we've been thinking of? I thought we kind of come up with something right before the Lawrence of Arabia episode that we were wanting to do.
I don't recall.
Did we plan a Disney Renaissance episode?
Did we? No, I don't recall doing that.
Neither do I.
I mean, I've been thinking about that stuff a lot lately. Oh, we could do like a classic Disney episode. Did we throw that out there?
Oh, yeah, that's what we were thinking of. Those movies are also short.
Those movies are also short.
And I've never seen Fantasia.
I have seen Fantasia.
I have seen Fantasia.
Open to watching it again.
It's been so long.
Yeah. Well, if what I think we wanted to do Bambi as one of them. Correct?
I would like to do Bambi.
I would too, because I'm willing to revisit that. And I'm one of those people who kind of call that movie kind of a towering achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Those actually been a little bit since I've seen it.
What else is there? I watched Pinocchio again pretty recently.
When's the last time you've seen Snow White?
Ooh, it's been a long time.
It's been a long-ass time for me, too. And
I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through.
So,
Okay.
Do we kind of want to put Brief Encounter on a little mini...
Yeah, we can. That's not necessarily something we have to do. I just thought, since I had watched it, if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Although I should probably disclose this. I won't be here the next 2 weeks.
Oh.
I'm not going to be here next week either, so I'm going to be in... I'm going to be in Holden Beach, North Carolina, but hopefully I can still podcast. There's life.
Reed, will you not be able to?
No.
Okay.
Oh, well.
Would you like us to postpone this episode and do something else, or?
Sure.
Okay. We'll save that.
We are taking Brief Encounter out of its mini fridge.
Okay, back to Brief Encounter then.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll do that, and then do we want to pair that with a screwball comedy, perhaps?
Ooh, I'd be up for that. Are there any British screwball comedy? I kind of want to keep the British theme.
That's a good question. Let me look into that real quick.
Ooh, what about It Happened One Night?
That's a movie that movie's actually very American, but I'd be open to doing it. And actually, that movie might make an interesting counterpoint to Brief Encounter in some ways.
What was it? It Happened One Night?
It Happened One Night. Yes, that's the Frank Capra movie, starring Claudette Colbert and Clark Gable. I have seen that movie, but I've been meaning to rewatch it and would be happy to talk about it.
I have not seen it, so a reappraisal of Brief Encounter and It Happened One Night.
Sure, I'm on board.
This is very short. This is very short work for you.
Well, thank you all for joining us for this long and winding discussion. Yep. Next week, should be a little less heavy, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I think invariably less heavy.
Yeah.
But Brief Encounter and It Happened One Night coming your way. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for self-aggrandizing us.
Yes. I do. I do. You see this?
Yeah. Okay, that's amazing, and I need one. But Drop my phone there.
Oh, for God's sakes, Alex, you choose now to send memes? You could send memes at any other part of the day, but at 11:30...
That's when all the best memes come out.
I guess so. I guess so.
Let me shut this shit down. Let me shut it down.